It's taken nearly 2 decades, but today we finally learned what happened to Natalee Holloway, the prime suspect finally confessing to killing her as part of a plea deal. Sam Brock spoke one-on-one with Natalee's mother and has her powerful reaction.
For nearly 2 decades, Natalee Holloway's disappearance gripped the world with unanswered questions and haunting uncertainty. What happened to this bright, promising teenager during a Caribbean vacation? Despite massive searches and multiple arrests, her fate remained a mystery that many believed would never be solved. But the truth finally emerged, revealing a night far darker than anyone imagined, marked by deception, cruelty, and heartbreak. How could a carefree trip end in such tragedy? And what does the shocking confession uncovered years later tell us about the nightmare behind the headlines? The vanishing on Aruba. Natalee Holloway's disappearance on the night of May 30th, 2005 remains one of the most puzzling and haunting cases of recent memory. It was the final night of a senior trip to Aruba, a Caribbean island known for its vibrant nightlife and beautiful beaches. Natalee, an 18-year-old honors student, was last seen leaving a popular nightclub called Carlos and Charlie's with 3 local young men. What happened after that moment set off a chain of events filled with confusion, lies, and unanswered questions. Articles about this man. He's the Playboy suspect. 17-year-old Joran Vanderloot implicated in the disappearance of an American woman from the island of Aruba, exactly 5 years early. The 3 men, Joran Vanderloot, a Dutch teenager living on Aruba, and brothers Deepo and Satish Kalpo, claimed they dropped Natalee off safely at her hotel. But Natalee never made it back to her room. Her packed luggage and untouched passport told a troubling story. She hadn't planned to leave the island without her belongings. Panic spread quickly when she failed to show up for the group's early morning flight home to the United States. Despite the initial chaos and widespread effort to locate Natalee, no physical evidence ever surfaced. Her phone, purse, or shoes, none were found. There were no signs of a struggle or a clear footprint, leading to no conclusive conclusion. The 3 men's stories about that night changed repeatedly under police questioning, deepening suspicions but never producing solid proof. Multiple arrests followed, but without witnesses or forensic evidence, the legal case remained fragile. The island and the world were left with a mystery that grew darker with time. The absence of a body or conclusive clues bred rumors and doubt. Public outrage and fear blended with frustration as official investigations appeared slow and uncertain. From the beginning, something about the case defied explanation, pushing people to wonder if the truth was being deliberately hidden or manipulated in some way. What makes Natalee's disappearance especially haunting is the sheer normalcy of her last-known movements. A night out with friends should have ended with a safe return, yet it spiraled into a nightmare. No one knew how or why the night turned tragic, only that it had. The answers, it seemed, were just out of reach, tangled in conflicting claims in a maze of secrecy. The story throughout the years only gained more power and intrigue. The youthful Dutchman, the one most often referred to, became a symbol of doubt. Still, no one was able to prove his guilt, and thus all accusations remained unfulfilled. The ones who cared the most, Natalee's family and close friends, were on the one hand with a very small amount of hope, but on the other hand full of endless queries. The truth behind the bad news and speculations was that a slayer had robbed the world of a young girl full of promises, and the truth was darkly concealed. However, what actually took place that night, and why was it kept in the dark for such a long time? The truth would only be revealed much later, and it would be more terrible than anyone could have imagined. The locals and tourists conducted a close observation of the case, some being convinced that there was a cover-up, while others were thinking that Natalee might still be alive somewhere. The lively exterior of the island concealed the deep suffering and distrust that were developing below the surface. However, This riddle, which was covered with silence and lies, had many more pieces to it than anyone had perceived so far. Transitioning from the confusion of that fateful night, it helps to understand who Natalee Holloway was, the bright young woman whose disappearance shattered so many lives and launched a desperate search for answers. The bright life behind the tragedy. Natalee Holloway was not just a missing person, she was a vibrant young woman with a promising future ahead. Born and raised in Mountain Brook, Alabama, she was an honor student known for her intelligence and determination. Natalee had earned a full scholarship to the University of Alabama, where she intended to study pre-med. Her dream was to become a doctor. Those who knew her described her as kind, responsible, and full of ambition. Her family and friends often spoke about her enthusiasm for life and her dedication to her goals. At just 18 years old, Natalee had already demonstrated a remarkable work ethic and a compassionate spirit. She was the kind of person who seemed destined to make a positive impact on the world. That made her disappearance all the more heart-wrenching for those left behind. The senior class trip to Aruba was supposed to be a celebration, a carefree finale to their high school years before embarking on the next chapter of their lives. For Natalee, it was a moment to create joyful memories with classmates. Instead, it became the backdrop to a tragedy that would alter countless lives forever. Her parents, especially her mother Beth, soon became public advocates for Natalee's safe return. Beth's relentless search and refusal to give up hope resonated deeply with many, turning Natalee's story from a local disaster into an international cause. Her family's pain was palpable and real, but so was their resolve. The passing of an individual brimming with expectations and possibilities brought on a collective mourning that extended far beyond the close family and friends of the deceased person. The case of Natalee went around the globe and caused a very sensitive spot in society to be revealed, thus emphasizing the susceptibility of young people even in places that seem to be absolutely safe. The misfortune gave rise to the confronting of the illusion of invincibility that many people consider as the main characteristic of youth during the important phases of their lives like travel and graduation. The society was combining their feelings with the perceptions of the case being not just a missing persons case, but a bright life interrupted and shattered. Her dreams, plans, and character created a very vivid contrast to the quietness and enigma that ensued. This opposition was the ground for the public's interest and grief being equally strong. With the additional information regarding her last night, it became evident that the case was not about a lost tourist, but an unfortunate young woman who had her future prematurely extinguished. The acknowledgement of her possibility and the suddenness of her vanishing created a case with deep emotional impact. The hunt for Natalee was a hunt for closure, hope, and justice. The search itself became a desperate race against time and shadows. As those who loved her refused to accept anything less than the full truth, the search that shocked a nation. The search for Natalee Holloway was one of the largest and most intense in Aruba's history. Once her disappearance was reported, local authorities, volunteers, and even members of the FBI joined forces to scour the island. Beaches, forests, roads, and diving spots were combed methodically with teams determined to find any trace of her. From the air, planes flew in tight patterns. On water, boats swept the shoreline looking for answers. Dogs trained to track scents were brought in to follow any potential trail. But despite the exhaustive effort, no clues emerged. Not a single item belonging to Natalee was recovered. Her shoes, purse, or phone were nowhere to be found. There was no evidence of a fight, struggle, or forceful removal that investigators could confirm, which only deepened the bafflement. As searches extended across the island and into the surrounding waters, the frustration grew. The silence was deafening. Those involved hoped for a breakthrough but found only shadows. Friends, family members, and authorities faced the painful reality that the likelihood of survival seemed to be slipping away with every day. Media coverage turned the island into an unwilling stage for an international tragedy. Stories flooded in, each with mounting theories but no solid facts. Public pressure on Aruban officials intensified, demanding transparency and justice. The absence of answers rather than lessening seems to harden the determination of everyone involved. The three young men who were last spotted with Natalee, Joran Vanderloot, and the Kalpo brothers, Deepak and Satish, all immediately attracted the attention of the investigators. Their inconsistent accounts and changing tales made the police suspicious. However, they could not be detained for long due to the lack of solid evidence. The trappings of the law, arrests followed by releases, occurred in a painful cycle, thus portraying the hardships of the prosecution's case, built more on mistrust than on hard facts. On the one hand, the extent of the search and the contradictions surrounding the suspects made the whole scenario more complex. On the other hand, the case was a source of discomfort for both the residents and the tourists who were watching a situation that seemed to be getting further away from public comprehension. The sorrow was felt all over the world, but justice still seemed out of reach. The passage of time made the emotional burden more significant. The Holloway family, together with their global supporters, incessantly demanded elucidation, notwithstanding growing despair. The enigma was still there in the public mind, a metaphor for the hopes lost and the questions still lingering. It was evident that what appeared to be a clear-cut missing persons case was in fact very complicated. The absence of any tangible resolution did not deter the search from exposing the difficulties and the sadness of trying to find out the truth when the darkness is too well concealed. The emptiness created by the slaying would, however, soon lead to the raising of doubts and a close investigation into what had really happened that night. And as the search dimmed, the world's attention shifted toward the people whose stories held the most unsettling contradictions. Early suspects and conflicting stories. Immediately, when Natalee disappeared, all the focus was on the last three young men who were with her, Joran Vanderloot and the Kalpo brothers, Deepak and Satish. The three had claimed at first that they had dropped her at the hotel safe and sound. Their tale appeared to be simple, but as the police investigation went deeper, the veins of discrepancy started to show. The differences in the timelines of their accounts raised more questions than they answered, thus causing suspicion among the detectives and the public eye. According to one version, Natalee was left at the hotel, while the other claimed she was taken to the beach or left in a car. The timeline changed as one man contradicted the others on the details of the night's events. Due to the differences in the stories told, it was hard to tell the truth from the lies. The evolving accounts led to a doubt that was only getting thicker and heavier with time. Police arrests of all three suspects were made shortly after, relying on the suspicion ignited by their conflicting statements. However, the lack of physical evidence and witnesses made the law enforcement's position very uncomfortable. Every arrest ended up being followed by a release since there was no proof available to the prosecutors to take the case to court. In the course of interviews and during the media, Joran's personality moved from being troubling to being totally out of character. At one point during the year 2008, he confessed to an undercover reporter that Natalee had died in front of him and that he had disposed of her body afterward. What was meant to be a shocking confession turned out to be nothing but a cruel lie designed to gain the reporter's admiration. He withdrew it almost immediately, and investigators, the family, and the public who were disappointed and bewildered were left with the question of the meaning of the confession. Despite the absence of evidence, suspicion did not wane. Instead, it fueled rumors and speculation that planted the seed of doubt around the men's involvement. The inconsistencies in their stories made it difficult for anyone to believe their innocence. The shifting accounts and deceptive acts blurred the line between possible truth and deliberate manipulation. Meanwhile, Natalee's family endured endless heartbreak as each dead-end investigation reopened old wounds. The waiting game tested their resilience, forcing them to cling to hope in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. Public interest in the case remained high, partly because the behavior of these young men kept new theories alive. The lack of closure was a painful backdrop to every development. Their repeated arrests but ultimate releases created an impression of justice just out of reach. It seemed like the men knew more than they admitted, but had crafted their lies carefully enough to evade conviction. Questions lingered about how much the truth was being obscured by fear, denial, or even intentional cover-up. The many versions of the story left a fog of confusion that persisted for years. As time passed, the suspicion surrounding these three intensified, but never solidified into legal proof. They were the main players in a drama that had lost its straightforwardness. While they remained the primary suspects, the tangled web of their contradictory claims made it hard to grasp what truly happened on that last night in Aruba. Though their stories seemed tied to the mystery, this chapter only deepened the dark shadows lurking behind Natalee's disappearance. It set the stage for growing doubts about the investigation itself. As many began to question whether justice was truly being pursued, unease about the case increasingly turned towards those meant to uphold it, drawing attention to the wider forces at play behind the scenes. Suspicions and allegations of cover-up. As the case dragged on without resolution, deep suspicions emerged about the integrity of the investigation. Many observers and members of the public began to question whether the Aruban authorities were conducting a thorough and impartial inquiry. The rapid release of the prime suspects, despite glaring contradictions in their stories, raised eyebrows and fueled allegations of a possible cover-up. The father of Joran Vanderloot, a prominent judge on the island at the time, came under particular scrutiny. Some believed that his influential position may have interfered with the pursuit of justice. This perception gnawed at the public's trust and amplified calls for transparency. Details that went unexplained only added to the sense that powerful forces were protecting the accused. Several critical gaps in the investigation appeared to have been overlooked or dismissed. Authorities never fully resolved the inconsistencies in the suspect's statements, nor did they aggressively pursue fresh leads that could have shed light on Natalee's whereabouts. The slow pace and uneven rigor of the inquiry led many to suspect that there was more going on beneath the surface. Conspiracy theories and speculation grew louder, some suggesting that local officials aimed to quietly close the case without holding anyone accountable. The island's reputation as a tourist destination added pressure to avoid scandal, making observers wonder if economic interests influenced the handling of evidence and witness testimony. It was as though the truth was being sacrificed to preserve appearances. This sense of institutional failure and possible protection created an atmosphere of mistrust that shadowed the entire investigation. Natalee's family and advocates expressed frustration with what they saw as half measures and disregard for justice. The case became more than just a missing persons tragedy. It evolved into a symbol of systemic problems in law enforcement and governance. On the contrary, the inattention to the passage of time with no visible results only made the situation worse. The public's hope was snuffed out while the official investigation was crawling along. Quite a few individuals believed that Natalee would never be found and those responsible would never be caught. One of the biggest reasons for the disillusionment among the experts is the public mistrust of the police. The unresolved matters gave rise to more emotional suffering for Natalee's family, who, despite the difficulties they kept on, were still fighting for the truth. The gap between the public's perspective and the official stance was continually widening. The higher the number of questions without answers, the more the enigma turned not only to the unknowns of that night, but also to the dark areas of possible manipulation. Sadly, the shooting case became one of the police's greatest worries. The authorities also thought that it was possible that something bad had happened to Natalee after all, and that she had been kidnapped and taken to a different island. It was nearly impossible to figure out what exactly happened, and thus the world continued to wait for answers that seemed to be further away than ever. In this kind of climate filled with uncertainty and chaos, whispers about other evil possibilities started to surface. One person even suggested that Natalee might have been abducted and slain. The doubt concerning what really happened was merely growing, and the world remained on the lookout for answers that did not seem to come any closer. And as speculation deepened, a new and chilling case from years later would cast an even darker shadow over what might have happened to Natalee. A dark connection. Stephanie Flores. A few years after the disappearance of Natalee Holloway, there was a bad pattern that was related to another young woman, Stephanie Flores. In 2010, 5 years after Natalee's disappearance, a 21-year-old student was found dead in a hotel room in Lima, Peru. The unfortunate event struck a chord because the main suspect in Natalee's disappearance, Joran Vandersloot, was also involved with Stephanie's death. This connection brought the public's attention back and also helps to reveal new aspects of the unresolved mystery of Natalee. Stephanie had met Joran at a casino and later went to his hotel room. Reports were saying that she saw files on Joran's laptop concerning the disappearance of Natalee, which was a fact believed to have led to a violent confrontation. Stephanie received mortal wounds, and the incident brought to light the dangerous side of the man who had long been suspected but never convicted in Natalee's case. This incident made it impossible to ignore the severity of his potential involvement years before. Following the assault, Joran tried to escape to Chile but was soon caught and put in prison. In contrast to Natalee, the proof against him in Peru was huge and impossible to deny. The police had crystal-clear evidence tying him to Stephanie's death, and the judiciary moved fast. His punishment gave a little bit of justice, but at the same time brought up the dreadful question of what happened to Natalee. In 2012, Joran was given a 28-year prison sentence in Peru for his part in Stephanie's death. The punishment was a turning point. It signified that the crime was not only closely related to the unresolved grief of the Holloway family, but also that accountability had been established. However, it was a moment of mixed feelings for Natalee's family. Justice was done for Stephanie, but the uncertainty regarding Natalee's situation remained. In 2021, after catching Joran smuggling hard substances into prison, his sentence was lengthened by 18 years. Nevertheless, the most he could serve was 35 years in prison, according to Peruvian law, which meant he would likely be out by 2045 unless something changed legally. The situation around the limited sentence led to the questioning of the adequacy of punishment in serious crimes and the discussion of the need for justice to be gradual. For the family of Natalee, the misfortune of Stephanie was a confirmation of the fears they had been keeping for a long time. The analogies between the two cases were too obvious to be overlooked. The two young girls had contact with the same person and both died brutally. This connection made it more painful and brought back the idea of what might have happened to Natalee. The change in emphasis on Joran's conduct in Peru raised the public and legal examination of his past to a greater extent. A lot of people believed that the case of Stephanie was a view of the past where fear, arrogance, and violence could have taken the life of Natalee many years ago. The similarities made an already tragic story even heavier with sorrow and complexity. The death of Stephanie and the imprisonment of Joran were a sad but certain reminder that some risks are not visible until they are revealed by a tragedy. For the Holloway family, it brought to light the necessity to claim full responsibility as soon as possible. The chapter had been closed, but still, the darkest parts of the larger story were being told. This connection deepened the urgency behind ongoing investigations and set the stage for revelations that would eventually bring a long-awaited confession, shattering the silence around Natalee's disappearance. The confession that changed everything. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in 2023 when Johan Vandersloot was extradited to the United States to face federal charges related to wire fraud and extortion, connected to his scams against Natalee's grieving mother. These charges stemmed from a heartbreaking episode in 2010 when Johan had demanded money from Beth Holloway for information about Natalee's whereabouts. Faced with this new legal battle, Johan agreed to a plea deal that required him to provide a full, honest confession, one that would finally expose the terrifying truth. In his statement, Johan described the last encounter with Natalee in chilling detail. According to him, Natalee rejected his advances on the beach and defended herself. In retaliation, Johan admitted kicking her in the face with full force, causing her to lose consciousness. What followed was a horrifying act of brutality. He struck her repeatedly in the head with a cinder block until she stopped moving. After this brutal assault, Johan claimed to have pushed Natalee's body into the ocean. He recounted these events with a disturbing calmness, showing no remorse or sorrow. He said plainly, "After that, I get out, I walk home." That same day, he returned to his routine, checking soccer scores, showering, and going to school. The absence of any emotional reaction shocked everyone who heard his confession. The confession of Johannes did significantly influence the investigation because it also demonstrated that the Kalpoe brothers were innocent of any involvement. He admitted that he was the sole perpetrator of the crime, which at last liberated them from the suspicion that had been hanging over them for several years. The newly discovered fact not only turned the spotlight on the case, but also facilitated the identification of the perpetrator. Beth Holloway stated that the lie detector test was a secondary means of confirming Johan's confession and thus gave more credibility to his account. The judge appeared to be supportive of his plea bargain, and consequently he received a 20-year prison sentence for the federal offense. This sentence would run concurrently with the one he was already serving in Peru for the slaying of Stephanie Flores. Besides, the deal stipulated that if he were to be released from prison in Peru at any time, he would be sent back to the United States to complete the rest of his sentence here. The unveiled truth was very disturbing and nearly unbelievable. The public was not only surprised by the crime, but also by the indifference Joran showed when he talked about a young woman's death. His admission was the factor that actually pulled the case from the shadows of intrigue and into the brutality's glare. The court was overpowered with sorrow when Beth Holloway met the man who had robbed her daughter of a future. Nevertheless, she was very articulate in her testimony, even though it was painful for her, saying, "Joran Vanderloot is no longer a suspect in my daughter's case. He is the one who committed the crime." The strength of her words was the heaviness of nearly 20 years of mourning, struggling for justice, and the bravery that went along with it. Yet, even with the truth finally spoken, the emotional weight it carried would open a new chapter, one where justice and heartbreak collided in deeply human ways. Justice and unanswered pain. Joran Vanderloot's admission of guilt has finally revealed some truths, but it has not lessened the hurt that the Holloway family has suffered for nearly 20 years. He was no longer a mere suspect. He declared he was the person responsible for Natalee's death. However, one tragic truth still exists. The remains of Natalee have yet to be discovered. The family is caught up in loss and a hope that can never be completely satisfied, since they have nowhere to grieve her. A situation that leaves them in a limbo of sorrow and a hope that can never be fully answered. Joran was given a 20-year federal term in the U.S. on top of the sentence he was already serving in Peru for the slaying of Stephanie Flores. The combined sentences denoted the gravity of his conduct. Nevertheless, people still questioned whether justice was indeed served. The 35-year maximum of Peru for non-life sentences raised the fear that he might one day be let out, a thought that was disturbing for many who still wanted real closure. Throughout the years, Natalee's mom, Beth Holloway, became iconic as a strong woman. Truth was what she was fighting for all the time. Even though there were a whole lot of years of heartache, she remained a determined and courageous person. The court was the place where her statements revealed her profound grief and her vigorous character. A mother who had constantly been there and never given up spoke, bearing the load of emotions that come with not knowing what happened to her daughter for such a long time. When Joran admitted his guilt, the court was filled with grief, disbelief, and a faint feeling of relief. The shocked audience could not believe the coldness with which he narrated the crime. His total lack of feeling and apology made the baseness behind his falsehood even more evident. The people who had been waiting for so long for the truth and dreaming of something less terrible than what they finally heard were the ones who got hurt the most. Natalee's case reached far beyond her family. It revealed how difficult international investigations can be and raised questions about whether power or influence slowed down the search for justice. The truth stayed hidden for years under media chaos, showing again how fragile and complicated justice can be. The non-stop news coverage, false leads, and changing stories created confusion that lasted for a long time. Many struggled to tell what was real and what was not. Each misleading twist reopened old wounds for the Holloway family, yet they continued to stay strong. Their endurance became a symbol of resilience in the middle of tremendous loss. Yoren's continued manipulation added even more pain. His 2010 attempt to extort Beth using her daughter's disappearance for money showed how dark and cruel his actions were long after Natalee was gone. Natalee Holloway's case shows us how long the search for truth can take and how deeply pain can cut when answers are delayed. Despite decades of uncertainty, justice finally found its way, bringing relief yet reminding us of what was lost. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into remarkable true stories. Thank you for watching, and stay with us by watching the next video now appearing on your